December 16th, 1944. Hitler launches his final desperate gamble, a massive surprise offensive through the Ardennes Forest of Belgium. The goal, split the Allied forces, capture the port of Antwerp, and turn the tide of the war. What follows is chaos. 30 divisions, 600,000 men, a frozen hell where temperatures plunge below zero, and snow falls so thick that soldiers can't see 10 feet ahead. The Battle of the Bulge becomes the bloodiest battle American forces will ever face. 19,000 Americans will die, and over 60,000 more will be wounded or captured. The Ardennes Forest is transformed into a white maze of death, where friend and foe alike are lost in the snow, where the cold kills as surely as bullets, where every sound could be salvation or slaughter. In a small hunting cabin deep in these woods, a German woman named Elisabeth Vincken waits out the storm. She's 47 years old, and she's already buried everything that mattered. Her husband died on the Eastern Front 2 years ago. Her 2 sons are fighting somewhere. She doesn't know where. They could be in France. They could be in Russia. They could be dead. She doesn't know. The war has taken her home, her city, everything she owned. All she has left is this cabin, borrowed from a friend, stocked with barely enough food to see her through Christmas. A small pot, some potatoes, a chicken she was saving. She plans to spend Christmas Eve alone, the way she's spent every day since the war took everyone she loved. She stirs the pot and listens to the artillery thunder in the distance, wondering if her sons can hear the same guns, wondering if they're cold, if they're hungry, if they're still alive. The knock at the door comes just after dark. Elisabeth freezes. Nobody should be out there. Nobody should know this cabin exists. The knock comes again, weaker this time, desperate. She moves to the door, her hand shaking, and opens it to the winter night. 3 young men stand there, barely visible in the darkness and snow. They're wearing American uniforms. One of them is slumped between the other 2, his leg wrapped in a bandage that's more blood than cloth. They don't speak. They just look at her with eyes that have seen too much, pleading without words. They're the enemy. Technically. Officially. According to every rule of the war happening just miles away, she should turn them away. Report them. But Elisabeth Vincken stopped caring about the rules when the rules took everything from her. She sees something else standing in her doorway. She sees someone else's sons. She sees boys who want to go home just like her boys want to go home. She steps aside and gestures them in. "Schnell," she says. Quickly. The Americans stumble inside, bringing snow and blood and the smell of war with them. They don't speak German. She doesn't speak English. But some things need no translation. She points them to the fire. She gestures at the wounded one. His name is Robin, though she doesn't know that yet, and examines his leg. The wound is bad. Infected. He needs proper medical care, and there's none for miles. She does what she can, cleaning it with boiled water, wrapping it with cloth torn from her own clothes. The Americans watch her with confusion and gratitude. One of them, Harry, tries to thank her. She doesn't understand his words, but she understands his meaning. She nods and returns to her pot, trying to figure out how to stretch 3 portions into 4. That's when the second knock comes. Every person in that cabin turns to stone. The Americans' hands move toward weapons that suddenly appear from beneath coats and belts. Elisabeth's heart hammers against her ribs because she knows that knock. She knows the rhythm of it. That's not an American knock. She moves to the door and the Americans hiss at her, frantic, trying to warn her or stop her or both. She ignores them. She opens the door. 3 German soldiers stand there, as lost and frozen as the Americans were 10 minutes ago. "Frohe Weihnachten," one of them says. "Merry Christmas. We're lost. We saw your light. They're boys too," she realizes. Boys in different uniforms, but boys all the same, with the same exhaustion in their eyes, the same desperate hope that someone, somewhere, might be kind. Behind her, she hears the Americans shifting, preparing. The Germans don't know yet. They don't know what's waiting inside. They're about to step into a cabin with their enemies, into a space too small for this much hate, where the only possible outcome is blood. Elisabeth Vincken has perhaps 3 seconds to decide what happens next. 3 seconds to choose between the war and something else. Something the war has been trying to kill for 6 years. She looks at the German soldiers. She looks back at the Americans, frozen by the fire, weapons hidden but ready. She looks at all of them, these children playing soldier, these boys who've been given guns and told who to hate, who've killed and watched friends die and who are all so desperately, achingly tired. And Elisabeth Vincken, who has lost her husband and her sons and her home and everything she ever loved to this war, makes a choice that defies everything the war has taught her. She steps aside and lets the German soldiers see the Americans. For one eternal moment, nobody moves. 6 young men stare at each other across a space that might as well be the entire war. Fingers move toward triggers. Breathing stops. The only sound is the fire crackling, indifferent to whether the next sound will be gunshots. Elisabeth moves between them. This small German woman, unarmed, powerless, steps between armed soldiers on both sides and speaks. Her voice is not loud, but it cuts through the cabin like a blade. "Hier wird heute Abend nicht geschossen," she says in German. Then she gestures broadly, making sure the Americans understand. Heiligabend. Christmas Eve. She points at the weapons they're all holding or reaching for. She points at the door. Alle Waffen draußen. All weapons outside. The silence that follows is absolute. 6 soldiers, trained to kill, armed and ready, stare at this woman who just declared her cabin neutral ground in the middle of a war. It's absurd. It's impossible. It defies every military order, every survival instinct, every reason these men have for being here. One of the German soldiers, his name is Heinz, starts to object. Elisabeth cuts him off. "Nein, not here, not tonight, not in my home." Her voice breaks on the last word, and suddenly they all understand. This isn't just a cabin. This is all she has left. This is the last place in the world where she has any power at all, and she's using that power to stop the war from coming inside. If you're feeling something right now, hit that like button. Because what happens next is going to restore your faith in humanity, and you'll want to remember this story. And subscribe, because we bring you the untold moments when ordinary people did extraordinary things. Nobody moves. The tension is a physical thing, heavy enough to crush them all. Then something impossible happens. One of the German soldiers, slowly, deliberately, unbuckles his rifle. He holds it for a moment, this weapon that's kept him alive, that's taken others' lives, that represents everything about who he's supposed to be in this moment. And then he steps outside and leans it against the cabin wall. An American soldier, Jim, watches this happen. He looks at the German. He looks at his own weapon. He looks at Elisabeth, standing there with her arms crossed, implacable as winter itself. He takes out his pistol and places it outside next to the German rifle. Then another weapon. And another. Like watching ice break. Like watching something impossible become real. One by one they disarm themselves. 3 American weapons, 3 German weapons, 6 instruments of death lined up in the snow outside a cabin where something else is about to happen. Something the war has been trying to kill for 6 terrible years. The German soldiers step fully inside. The door closes. 7 people stand in a space barely big enough for them all, and nobody knows what to do next. The hatred is supposed to be automatic. The violence is supposed to be inevitable. But Elisabeth doesn't give them time to remember their enemies. She gestures everyone toward the fire. She goes to her pot, and she begins to cook. She takes that chicken she was saving for her own Christmas and puts it in the pot. She adds the potatoes. She stretches and divides, and somehow, by that magic that only mothers know, that alchemy of making enough when there isn't enough, she creates a meal for 7 people. They watch her work. Germans and Americans stealing glances at each other, trying to reconcile the propaganda with the reality sitting 3 feet away. The enemy was supposed to be a monster. The enemy was supposed to be easy to hate. But the enemy is just cold and hungry and young and scared. Exactly like them. The smell of cooking food fills the cabin. Stomachs growl. Nobody has eaten properly in days. Elisabeth begins to serve, handing bowls to each of them without distinction, without favoring her countrymen over the Americans. The gesture is simple but radical. You're all the same to me. You're all hungry. You're all far from home. One of the Americans tries to give his portion to Robin, the wounded one. Elisabeth stops him. She's made enough. Somehow, impossibly, there's enough. They begin to eat. At first in silence, wary, uncertain. The food is simple, but after days of frozen rations and fear, it tastes like grace itself. Someone makes a sound of appreciation. Someone else smiles. The barriers begin, ever so slightly, to crack. Then Heinz, the German soldier, notices Robin's leg. He's got medical training. He was a medical student before the war turned students into soldiers. He looks at the wound and his professional instinct overcomes everything else. He speaks in German to Elisabeth, asking if he can look at it. She translates with gestures to Robin, who stiffens. This is the enemy. The enemy wants to touch him. Harry and Jim shift protectively, but Elisabeth nods encouragingly, and Heinz slowly, carefully, moves closer. "Lass mich sehen," he says softly. "Let me see." The words mean nothing to Robin, but the gesture does. Robin hesitates, then nods. What happens next breaks something open in that cabin. Heinz unwraps the wound with careful hands. He examines it, frowning at the infection. He reaches into his pack and pulls out German medical supplies. Antiseptic, clean bandages, things the Americans don't have. He cleans the wound. His hands are gentle, professional, remembering their purpose before the war taught them to destroy. These are hands that wanted to heal, hands that remember what they were supposed to be. He works in silence while everyone watches. German hands healing an American body, enemy hands performing an act of mercy. When he's done, he wraps the leg properly and sits back. Robin stares at him. Heinz stares back, and then Robin extends his hand. Heinz takes it. They shake hands. American and German. 2 boys who might have killed each other this morning, who might kill each other tomorrow, sharing a moment of profound humanity in a cabin lit by firelight on Christmas Eve. Something shifts. You can feel it in the room, like a weight lifting, like a door opening. If they can do that, maybe they can do more. Maybe they can remember what they are beneath the uniforms. Someone starts humming. One of the Germans, Fritz, the youngest, who's only 19. He's humming Stille Nacht, Silent Night. Harry recognizes the melody and begins to sing the English words. Silent Night, Holy Night. Fritz continues in German. Stille Nacht, Heilige Nacht. The same song, different words. Same hope, same longing for peace. Jim joins in. Then another German. Then all of them, Americans and Germans, singing together in 2 languages that become one prayer. All is calm. All is bright. The war is outside. Humanity is here. They begin to talk, stumbling through language barriers with gestures and drawings and the few words they share. One of the Americans pulls out a photograph of his girl back home. The Germans crowd around to look. She's pretty. They agree in a mix of German and English and pointing. One of the Germans shows a picture of his mother. She looks like everyone's mother, worn, loving, worried. They pass around more photographs. Farms that look the same whether they're in Iowa or Bavaria. Little sisters who could be anyone's sister. Dogs and houses and lives that war has interrupted. They talk about what they'll do after. Harry wants to be a teacher. Heinz wants to finish medical school. Jim wants to go back to his father's farm. Same. Fritz wants to see the ocean. He's never seen the ocean. They talk about food they miss, about how much they hate the cold, about how tired they are. They talk about everything except the war. For these few hours, they refuse to be soldiers. They insist on being human. The night deepens. The fire burns low and Elisabeth adds more wood. Outside, the war continues. Artillery rumbles in the distance. Men die in the snow. The battle grinds on with its terrible mathematics. But inside this cabin, 7 people have created something the war cannot touch. A space where the only thing that matters is that they're all far from home. They're all cold. They're all scared. They're all human. One of the Germans gives his scarf to Robin. "For your journey," he says through Elisabeth. One of the Americans gives his chocolate ration to Fritz. "You're too skinny," he says with a smile. They exchange these small gifts like peace offerings, like proof that this night happened, that it was real. As dawn approaches, they all know what must come next. The spell has to break. The war is waiting. Elisabeth gives them directions, speaking to each group separately. She sends the Germans east, away from American lines. She sends the Americans west, away from German positions. Different paths, different directions. Paths that won't cross, that might let them all survive. At the door, they gather one last time. Germans and Americans facing each other in the gray morning light. They shake hands. Some embrace. They're enemies again in 5 minutes, but for this moment, there's something else. Something the war has tried to kill, but couldn't. Fritz is crying. Jim is crying. Nobody's ashamed. They collect their weapons from the snow, these tools of death that seem obscene now after a night of shared humanity. They shoulder them like burdens, like crosses they have to carry back into the darkness. The Germans leave first, heading east into the forest. The Americans watch them go, these boys they might have to kill tomorrow, these friends they made for one impossible night. Then the Americans leave, Harry and Jim supporting Robin between them. His leg is better thanks to Heinz. He might make it. They might all make it. Elisabeth watches them disappear into the trees. She stands alone in the doorway of her cabin, this small space that held the entire war and transformed it into something else. She doesn't know if any of them will survive. The battle of the Bulge will rage for another month. Thousands more will die. Some of these boys might be among them, but for one night they lived. They remembered. They chose humanity over hate, mercy over murder, grace over vengeance. For one night in one cabin, the war lost. Not permanently, not completely, but enough. Enough to prove it was possible. Enough to prove that underneath every uniform is a person who wants to go home, who misses their mother. Who's tired of being afraid, who can still choose kindness even when everything around them is burning. If this story moved you, drop a comment below. Tell us about a moment when someone showed you unexpected kindness, when someone chose humanity over hate, because those moments matter. They always have. They always will. The soldiers who survived that night carried it with them for the rest of their lives. Fritz made it home. So did Harry. Heinz finished medical school and spent 40 years healing people, his hands finally doing what they were meant to do. They told their children about that night, their grandchildren. The story spread slowly, quietly, passed from person to person like a secret truth, that even in the darkest moments, humanity survives. Years later, some of them reconnected. The Americans and Germans who shared that Christmas Eve found each other and met again, old men now, the war long over. They embraced like brothers, because that's what they were. For one night in 1944, in a cabin in the snow, they were brothers. Elisabeth Vincken lived until 1999. She never sought recognition for what she did. She never called herself a hero. When people asked her about that night, she said simply, "It was Christmas. They were boys far from home. What else could I do?" What else could she do, as if kindness was the only logical choice, as if mercy was inevitable, as if humanity was the default and hate was the aberration? Maybe she was right. Maybe that's the real lesson of that night, that kindness isn't extraordinary. It's what we are when we strip away everything else. It's what remains when all the reasons for hate have fallen away and we're left with just each other, cold and hungry and far from home. This is what we need to remember. Not that war doesn't happen. It does. Not that hate doesn't exist. It does. But that even in the middle of the deadliest battle, even when we've been given every reason to kill each other, even when the entire world has gone mad with violence, even then we can choose something else. Even then, a mother can stand in a doorway and say, "Not here." Even then, enemies can become friends for one night. Even then, humanity can win. The Battle of the Bulge ended in January 1945. The Allies pushed back the German offensive. Thousands died. Thousands more were wounded. The war ground on for 4 more terrible months before Germany finally surrendered. In the vast accounting of that battle, the divisions committed, the casualties taken, the ground lost and gained, one small cabin sheltering 7 boys for one night doesn't register. It doesn't appear in any official history. No medals were given, no commendations issued. But those 7 people knew. They knew that in a war that killed millions, in a battle that killed thousands, they had created something that the war couldn't destroy. For one night, they proved that humanity was stronger than hate, that mercy was possible, that we can choose to be something other than what the war demands. That cabin still stands in those woods, a small structure that held the weight of the world for one night. And somewhere, in the children and grandchildren of those soldiers, the story continues, passed down like a sacred trust, a reminder, a promise. That even in our darkest hours, even when everything is falling apart, even when hate seems inevitable and violence seems necessary, even then we can open the door. We can put down the weapons, we can share the meal, we can sing the song, we can choose to be human. If this story touched your heart, if you believe humanity is worth fighting for, hit that subscribe button. Because the world needs these stories now, more than ever. The world needs to remember what happened in that cabin. That on Christmas Eve, 1944, in the middle of the deadliest battle of the deadliest war in human history, 7 people proved that humanity could win. Not through violence, not through force, but through one simple choice. The choice to see the enemy as human. The choice to offer mercy instead of murder. The choice to open the door. That is the legacy of the Christmas Truce of the Bulge. Not that the war ended, not that peace was achieved, but that for one night, in one place, ordinary people did something extraordinary. They refused to let hate win. They insisted on their humanity, and in doing so, they showed us what we're capable of. Not sometimes, not in special circumstances, but always, if we choose it. If we're brave enough. If we remember that underneath every uniform, every flag, every side of every conflict, there are just people. Just boys and girls who want to go home, who miss their mothers, who are tired of being afraid. Humanity won that night. It wins every time someone chooses mercy, every time someone opens the door anyway, every time someone says, "Not here, not in my home, not tonight." It's winning right now, somewhere, in ways we'll never know about, in small acts of kindness, in unexpected mercy, in doors that open when they should stay closed, in meals that stretch to feed one more, in hands that heal instead of hurt. That's the story of the cabin in the snow. That's the story of Elisabeth Vincken and 6 boys who became brothers for one night. That's the story of what we are when we remember, when we choose, when we insist on our humanity, even when everything around us insists on our hate. And that story isn't finished. It continues in every choice we make, in every moment we decide whether to close the door or open it, whether to see an enemy or a human being, whether to choose hate or choose something harder, braver, more powerful. Choose humanity. It always wins. It won that night. It's winning now. It will win tomorrow. Because hate is loud, but humanity is patient. Hate is strong, but humanity is stronger. Hate can win battles, but humanity wins the war that matters, the war for who we are, the war for what we choose to be. That cabin proved it. 7 people proved it. Elisabeth proved it, and now it's our turn to carry that story forward, to remember what it taught us, to choose, in our own moments, in our own doorways, to let humanity win. Merry Christmas, Elisabeth. Wherever you are, you showed us the way. You showed us what courage looks like. Not the courage to fight, the courage to stop fighting, the courage to say, not here, the courage to feed the enemy, the courage to believe that humanity is stronger than war. You are right. It is. It always was. It always will be. Humanity won.